Welcome to the deep dive, where we really try to cut through all that noise, the constant flood of information, and give you a genuine shortcut to being properly informed.
Yeah, it's almost impossible these days to keep track of everything happening globally, let alone figure out how it all connects.
Yeah.
Feels like you need a dedicated research team just to stay afloat.
Exactly. And that's precisely why we're here. We do the heavy lifting for you.
Our job is to sift through a whole load of sources, pull out the really crucial bits, the core ideas, and present them clearly, concisely, but also hopefully with enough context to spark some real thinking.
And today, we're diving into something pretty intense, actually. We've gone through an emergency type episode of Bitcoin Hard Talk that aired just last Friday, August 29th, 2025. It's hosted by the well-known Bitcoin OG, Simon Dixon.
Right, and the title alone tells you it's going to be heavy. It's called Mass Shootings, Immigration, and Unrest, setting the stage for the pre-crime agenda. Quite a title.
It really is. So this deep dive, our aim is to basically pull out the main arguments from Dixon's original broadcast, which was over 2 hours long, by the way.
Yeah, quite a marathon. So we're giving you a condensed but still thorough look at his perspective. He weaves together global events, this idea of a looming pre-crime agenda, and something he terms the proof of weapons network.
And just to be super clear up front, our role here is to lay out Dixon's framework, his arguments, as accurately and impartially as we can. We're not here to agree or disagree, but to help you understand his specific viewpoint, his analysis, and the sometimes startling connections he makes.
Exactly. It's about providing the information so you can think critically about it yourself. Think of this as mental exercise, really, encouraging a closer look at the narratives swirling around us every day. Okay, should we get into it?
Let's do it. Where does Dixon start? What's the foundation of this whole argument?
Well, the absolute core of Dixon's thesis, something he's been building on for a while, is this concept he calls the proof of weapons network, the POW network for short.
Proof of weapons, like proof of work in Bitcoin, but weapons.
Sort of playing on that, yeah. He defines this POW network as the entire global fiat money system. So we're talking banks, financial institutions, the whole shebang. But here's the kicker. He argues it's not just a neutral system for transactions. He claims it's fundamentally designed to fuel conflict, to extract wealth, and ultimately to concentrate power.
Okay, whoa. Designed to fuel conflict, not just like an unfortunate side effect of global finance, but an intentional design. That's a strong statement. How does he say it does that?
He paints a picture of this network as a kind of stateless global entity.
Yeah.
It operates above individual nations, blurring the lines between national interests and, well, corporate or financial agendas. He believes this setup inevitably leads to perpetual wars.
Perpetual wars.
Yeah, and in this model, national governments become sort of secondary, subordinates almost, acting
Yeah.
in ways that serve this larger overarching power structure, this POW network. The key takeaway he wants people to get is that this network actually profits from the chaos and conflict it helps generate.
Right, so instability isn't a bug, it's a feature, in his view.
That's a good way to put it. And that leads directly into his next major point, which is about engineered crises.
Engineered crises, okay.
Dixon is quite adamant that many of the things dominating headlines, mass shootings, sudden surges in immigration, waves of civil unrest, he argues these are not just spontaneous organic events bubbling up from society.
He thinks they're manufactured.
He claims they're deliberately engineered. And the purpose, according to him, is to generate widespread fear and anxiety. That fear then creates the public acceptance, or even demand, for radical new systems of control.
Okay, that's where the pre-crime agenda part of his title comes in, I assume, connecting these events to new control tech.
Exactly. He really zooms in on the pattern. He highlighted a specific recent U.S. school shooting one at a Catholic school. Dixon focused on what he called its symbology, arguing it was deliberately chosen to, in his words, manufacture rage.
Strong language. And the connection to pre-crime.
He claims that immediately after this event, there was a very rapid, coordinated PR push advocating for pre-crime AI surveillance, like the solution was ready and waiting.
Wow, so tragedy happens and boom, here's the surveillance tech we need.
That's his assertion. And he names names. He introduces this system called Gideon, describing it as America's first ever AI threat detection platform, which he said was literally set to launch the week after his broadcast.
Gideon. And what does Gideon supposedly do?
Its function, as Dixon describes it, is to detect criminal activity before it occurs. It does this by constantly scraping the internet 24/7 looking for potential threats.
How does it know what a threat looks like online?
He said it uses an Israeli-grade ontology. Now, an ontology in this context is basically a complex system for classifying information, defining relationships between data points. So, an Israeli-grade one implies, highly sophisticated, potentially military-developed AI that can parse language, context, connections, everything to identify specific threat language and automatically route alerts to law enforcement.
Okay, that sounds powerful and potentially concerning. Does he link this to any existing tech?
He does. He directly links Gideon to Palantir technology. And he brings up claims about similar systems, like one called Lavender, which was reportedly beta tested in conflict zones, specifically mentioning Gaza. Dixon cites reports alleging that Lavender targeted civilians 83% of the time.
83%. If true, applying something like that domestically well, the implications are huge.
Absolutely. And Dixon's point is that these aren't just hypothetical concerns. He believes these systems are being rolled out now, justified by these crises. But he also argues the U.S. isn't the first place this playbook has been run.
Oh, where else?
He points squarely at the U.K., calling it a beta test for these kinds of operations. He sees an identical pattern there.
An identical pattern. How so?
He connects things like immigration protests, specific narratives being amplified. He mentions Elon Musk pushing the grooming gangs narrative, for example, and how these things led to mass arrests, actual changes in UK law, and crucially, government contracts with companies like Palantir.
So manufactured outrage leading to legal changes and surveillance contracts. He sees the same sequence.
Exactly. He specifically mentioned this sequence building up to protests planned for September 13th in the UK, suggesting it's an ongoing strategy.
Okay. Beyond these specific events and tech rollouts, Dixon also paints a broader picture, right, about societal decline.
Yes, and it's pretty grim. He rattles off a whole list of statistics about societal deterioration, particularly in the West. But he presents them not as separate problems, but as symptoms of this underlying proof of weapons network he's describing.
What kind of stats are we talking about?
Well, mental health is a big one. He cited figures like nearly 30% of U.S. adults diagnosed with depression, 18% in the U.K. reporting moderate to severe symptoms in 2025, and record-high suicides in both countries in 2023.
That's devastating.
It is. Then there are social crises, over 107,000 overdose deaths in the U.S. in 2023. Exploding homelessness, 770,000 estimated in the U.S. in 2024, up 18% year-on-year, and huge numbers in temporary accommodation in the U.K.
And the
Economic strain, definitely. Climbing bankruptcies, U.S. corporate bankruptcies, hitting a 14-year high in 2024. He talks about the K-shaped economy, that massive wealth inequality where, the richest 1% own over 30% of U.S. wealth, almost half of all stocks.
We hear about that K-shape a lot.
Right. He also brings in rising crime active shooter incidents, up 60% in the U.S. since 2019, knife offenses in the U.K. up almost 80% over a decade. Cultural shifts, too, like the surge in sexual content online, the rise of the creator economy, exemplified by OnlyFans, and immigration UK net migration at historic peaks. He notes research often shows no clear link between immigration and overall crime rates, but calls the numbers themselves unprecedented.
So he's listing all these undeniable problems: mental health, drugs, homelessness, inequality, crime.
Yes, but his crucial argument, the thread connecting all of this, in his view, is that these aren't just unfortunate, complex societal issues unfolding organically.
He circles back to
his core claim. They are engineered, symptoms deliberately created or exacerbated by this proof of weapons network to weaken society and pave the way for control.
That's a really provocative and, frankly, quite dark interpretation of current events. It counters a lot of mainstream explanations.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Which leads us to why he thinks people don't see this alleged engineering.
Okay, why?
Distraction narratives. He argues that certain highly charged narratives, he specifically calls out the Muslim invasion narrative and the Jews rule the world trope, are deliberately amplified.
Amplified by whom? The network.
Presumably, yes, or those who benefit from it. He says these narratives are designed to sow division, to get people fighting amongst themselves based on ethnicity or religion, so they don't look at the underlying financial system, the POW network, which he sees as the real driver.
Scapegoating, basically.
Exactly. He unpacks the Muslim invasion narrative as suggesting this deliberate plan for demographic and religious change purely to stir up civil unrest and make populations fearful and thus more controllable, more accepting of these engineered solutions.
And the Jews rule the world claim. How does he counter that?
He goes straight to data. He presents wealth distribution figures. Christians holding about 55% of global wealth, people with no religion 35%, Muslims around 6%, and Jews only about 1%.
1%. That clearly pushes back against the idea of dominant financial control based on that group identity.
Right, and he doubles down on billionaires, pointing out only around 10% worldwide are Jewish, meaning 90% are not. He mentions names like Musk, Bezos as examples of the non-Jewish super wealthy.
So, using data to dismantle that specific conspiracy theory, what about influence, though, like lobbying?
He addresses that too. He contrasts the lobbying spending of U.S. defense corporations, which he pegs at around $149 million, with pro-Israel groups like AIPAC at about $30 million.
So, defense companies spend nearly 5 times more.
According to his figures, yes. His point is that U.S. foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East, is likely driven far more by the military-industrial complex's profits and strategic geopolitical goals than by any specific ethnic or religious lobby.
How does he frame the U.S.-Israel relationship then?
He describes it through what he calls the cold logic of empire. He sees Israel not primarily through a lens of religious affinity, but as a key strategic asset, maybe even a proxy for the U.S. serving American geopolitical aims and, crucially, the defense industry's bottom line.
Okay, so if it's not specific ethnic or religious groups pulling the strings, and these narratives are distractions, who are the real puppeteers in Dixon's view? Where does the power actually lie?
It lies, he argues, within highly consolidated financial structures and a handful of massive institutional investors. This is what he calls the financial industrial complex, or FIC.
The FIC, who's in it?
He names the big ones, the names you probably recognize: BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. These giants manage trillions of dollars in assets.
Right, they own huge chunks of almost every major company.
Exactly. He highlights their massive equity stakes across the board, but also, and this is key, their cross-ownership of each other. Vanguard owns a big piece of BlackRock, BlackRock owns a piece of State Street, and so on.
Ah, so even though they look like separate companies?
He calls it decentralized ownership, centralized control. Because they own each other and own everything else, their interests become deeply aligned, creating this sort of unified control block, even without a formal conspiracy.
That's a really interesting concept. Decentralized ownership, centralized control. How do they wield this control beyond just owning shares?
Through several mechanisms. Obviously, their voting power on corporate boards is immense, but also through things like ESG scores, environmental, social, and governance criteria.
ESG, right. That directs huge flows of investment money.
Precisely. By setting the ESG standards or influencing them, they guide where capital flows, effectively shaping corporate behavior across the globe. Dixon stresses this isn't driven by some grand ideology necessarily, but by the relentless pursuit of profit and asset accumulation. Keep the machine growing.
So pure financial logic driving it all.
Largely, yes. And he doesn't see the FIC operating in isolation. He argues it merges and collaborates with the military-industrial complex, MIC, the defense contractors and their government ties, and the technology-industrial complex, PAC, big tech, data companies, AI developers. Together, FIC, MIC, TKFL, that, for Dixon, constitutes the real power structure.
The proof of weapons network.
FIC, MIC, forming the POW network.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the end game then? According to Dixon, where is this all heading?
The end game, in his view, is pretty dystopian. He warns of a move towards a totalitarian technocracy.
Totalitarian technocracy, meaning?
Meaning a society managed and controlled through technology, driven by artificial intelligence, implemented through central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, and enforced via social credit scores. All designed, he says, to codify control.
Codify control, so embedding the rules directly into the financial and digital infrastructure. Exactly. He paints this picture of a managed society where citizens effectively trade freedom for the perception of security, a trade facilitated by these engineered crises, and the resulting fear. It's quite a stark vision. Hearing him lay it all out, connecting these disparate pieces, it does feel, well, overwhelming.
It certainly does. Does he give this process a name, this move towards technocracy?
He calls the strategy Operation Vassalization.
Vassalization?
No.
Like making vassals subject.
Precisely. He describes it as a multi-pronged strategy. He claims it's a playbook that was perfected, or at least heavily used, on countries in the global south, but now it's being cannibalized and applied domestically within Western nations.
How does Operation Vassalization work? Who does it target?
It targets everyone, but in different ways. For individuals, it's primarily through debt, credit cards, student loans, mortgages, creating debt slaves, then layering on control mechanisms like FICO scores, and in the future, he predicts personal ESG scores or carbon credit scores, all linked to your digital ID and, eventually, CBDCs.
So, your behavior, your consumption, your compliance, all tracked and scored. impacting your financial life.
That's the potential he sees. For corporations, Operation Vassalization works through financialization, turning everything into a tradable financial instrument. Securitization, tokenization. It allows smaller companies to be easily acquired, assets stripped, and entire industries made subordinate to the FIC through complex compliance demands, often tied to things like ESG.
Making businesses dependent on the big financial players.
Right. And for countries, he claims it involves covert operations, stirring up that civil unrest we talked about to destabilize governments and install more compliant ones. Plus, deploying surveillance tech globally, he mentions things like Starlink and Palantir being used in this context.
It's a comprehensive vision of control operating on multiple levels.
It is. He even applies this framework to specific problems, like the looming pension crisis in the West. He attributes the crisis itself partly to demographics, but also to the cost of the perpetual wars funded by the POW network.
And how does he think the network plans to solve the pension problem?
He outlines three pretty chilling potential scenarios. First, basically eliminate the pensioners. Engineer severe cost of living crises, or even, he suggests, operations like COVID, which disproportionately affected the elderly, could be seen in this light.
Wow. Okay, what's the second?
Second, flood the West with productive immigrants to prop up the demographics and tax base. Or, alternatively, reset the global trade order using things like tariff to gain access to cheaper labor in the global South again.
Okay, and the third?
The third potential solution involves universal basic income, UBI. Put Western populations on UBI as jobs get automated away by AI and robotics. But this UBI world would be heavily regulated by a powerful police and surveillance state, made possible by policies around borders, whether open or closed, that facilitate control.
UBI funded by?
That's the question, isn't it? Likely tied into the CBDC system, potentially conditional on behavior tracked by social credit scores.
It sounds like freedom exchanged for subsistence under constant watch.
That's the picture he paints. And he tries to connect this theory to current events happening right now, arguing they illustrate Operation Vassalization in real time.
Like what recent examples does he give?
He talks about tariffs like the ones imposed between major economies. He doesn't see them just as trade disputes, but as tools to create distressed assets, weakened companies, struggling utilities.
Which can then be bought cheaply.
Exactly. He points to private equity giants, naming BlackRock and Blackstone again, snapping up assets like U.S. utilities or UK water companies. And he links this to the massive growing energy and water demands of AI data centers, suggesting a strategic consolidation of resources needed for the tech infrastructure of the future.
Interesting connection. What else?
He mentioned the recent order by former President Trump to deploy U.S. military National Guard troops to around 19 states. The stated reason was crime and deportations. But Dixon interprets this through the lens of the POW network. He argues it primarily benefits private prison companies, naming GEO Group and CoreCivic, claiming they profit directly from each arrest and deportation, essentially creating a profit motive for increased state enforcement.
Right, the private prison industrial complex.
And he circles back to that U.S. school shooting he focused on earlier. He describes the immediate aftermath as a deliberately confusing cocktail of narratives, conflicting details about the shooter, transgender, strange notes, kill Trump, symbols found, neo-Nazi, anti-Jew Muslim tropes, Russian symbols.
Why create confusion?
To maximize disorientation and fear, he argues. To break down people's ability to understand what's happening, making them more receptive to the prepackaged solution. The rollout of pre-crime AI surveillance, like Palantir's tech.
So the confusion itself is part of the strategy.
That's his claim. He also weaves in geopolitical moods, U.S. warships near Venezuela, talk about Greenland's resurfacing, Elon Musk reviving the grooming gangs narrative just before UK protests, ongoing Gaza conflict protests. He sees all these as tactics, generating unrest, distracting populations, and ultimately serving the interests of the proof of weapons network.
It was an incredibly complex web he's weaving, connecting finance, technology, politics, social issues, global events. It's almost dizzying.
It really is. Which brings us finally to his proposed solution. Given this incredibly detailed and, let's be honest, quite frightening vision of the world, what does Simon Dixon suggest people do about it?
Yeah, if this POW network is the enemy, how do you fight it?
His answer is surprisingly direct. He says the network needs one thing above all: your money, your participation in the fiat system.
So, starve the beast.
Essentially, yes. His core call to action is to boycott the system.
Yep.
Opt out. Put your money, your savings, your wealth outside of their control.
And how does he propose doing that?
Primarily through Bitcoin. Specifically, Bitcoin held in self-custody, meaning you control your own private keys, not trusting an exchange or a custodian.
Not Bitcoin ETFs, then. Even the big ones managed by firms like BlackRock.
Definitely not, according to Dixon.
Mm.
He explicitly advises against BlackRock financial products, broad market ETFs like the S&P 500, and yes, even Bitcoin ETFs. Because in his view, holding Bitcoin through those traditional financial vehicles still keeps your money within the proof of weapons network's infrastructure.
So pure self-custodied Bitcoin is the key. Any other practical steps?
Yes. Reduce personal debt as much as possible. Get out of the debt slavery aspect of Operation Vassalization. He advises acquiring more Bitcoin regularly, maybe monthly, and also consciously redirecting your spending and capital toward local decentralized businesses and communities. Support alternatives to the big centralized corporations.
Building parallel structures almost.
That seems to be the idea. The overall goal, as he puts it, is to achieve individual sovereignty, especially financial sovereignty, to resist the control grid he sees being built. For Dixon, Bitcoin is the resistance. It's the tool that allows individuals to peacefully transition and maintain autonomy in a future he believes will be increasingly dominated by AI, CBDCs, stablecoins, and surveillance. It's about reclaiming control, starting with your money.
So there we have it, a whirlwind tour through Simon Dixon's analysis from that Bitcoin Hard Talk episode. Mass shootings, immigration, and unrest, setting the stage for the pre-crime agenda.
Yeah, a complex picture. Engineered events fueling fear, justifying a pre-crime surveillance state, all allegedly driven by this overarching proof of weapons network, this coalition of financial, military, and tech power.
With Bitcoin presented not just as an investment, but as a fundamental tool for opting out and reclaiming individual sovereignty.
It's definitely a lot to chew on, isn't it? And listening to this deep dive, the challenge for you, the listener, is really to engage that critical thinking. How do you sift through this? How do you determine what rings true when you're presented with such detailed, intricate, and frankly unsettling visions of how the world works? Especially when they draw direct lines from global geopolitics right down to your personal finances and freedoms.
That really is the core question, isn't it? It forces you to re-examine the connections you perhaps took for granted. And maybe it leaves us with this final thought to ponder. In this world that's digitizing and centralizing so rapidly, what concrete steps, even small ones, could you actually take to cultivate your own autonomy, your own independence? Particularly in your financial life, how do you ensure you're making conscious choices rather than, as Dixon puts it, becoming a useful idiot for forces you may not fully perceive?
Something definitely worth considering long after you finish listening.